All right. Hey guys, welcome back to our second Facebook Live series and video on stress. It's been a little bit delayed. The plan was to go live last Friday, but we're here with you this evening and very glad to be doing so. And today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into stress and in particular how exercise can affect your stress. So last week we spoke a little bit about what is stress, how does it affect our health and our body both positively and negatively, and came to the resounding conclusion that chronic stress is not really a good thing for your health. Pretty fair to say.
Absolutely.
And today we're going to be going through, like I said, specifically how exercise affects your brain, affects your mental health and your stress levels, and what kind of exercise might work best for you guys as well. So let's get straight into it.
Yeah.
So I'll hand over to Jack to start with, and he's going to take everyone through a couple of worthwhile points to know about exercise and stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So this video is going to be, I think, much more happy and upbeat than probably last week. Last week we were obviously talking about the effects of chronic stress on our health, and obviously there are quite a few adverse effects which we went on last week, and we want everyone to be conscious of that so that they are really proactive in managing their health to make sure that doesn't happen. But certainly today's video will be much more, I suppose, upbeat and exciting in terms of us going over things that you can actively do to manage your own stress. So it's going to be hopefully a video that you find you get a lot out of, and hopefully there's elements that you can incorporate into your lifestyle to help you manage your stress as well. So a few sort of little facts and whatnot to start with, just to kick things off, is that research has actually showed that if we are nice and active, I suppose, the research was done with two population groups, one which did exercise quite actively and one which was not so active. And it was actually found that there was 43% fewer days of poor mental health and stress with those that were adequately physically active. So meeting our national physical activity guidelines of our sort of 30 minutes or so of activity on most days. So that's pretty cool to know, because if we can tick that off, then it's almost, we're twice as likely almost to then have be in a better mood state for longer, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So a term that you're going to hear Tom and I probably mention quite a bit today is the role of endorphins. And so just before we obviously tick that off and use that quite extensively throughout this video, I thought I'd just quickly explain what endorphins actually are. So effectively, the word endorphin comes from two words, one being endogenous, which basically means from within the body, and the other one means morphine, which is basically like a pain reliever kind of thing. Probably a lot of us have heard of, the drug morphine, which a lot of us probably been pumped up with post-surgery or something like that.
If you've been in an ambulance, you probably use morphine at some point.
Yeah, it's a really good pain manager. So the concept of endorphins is basically like pain relief that comes from within the body, which is a pretty cool concept to think that we're actually able to generate that ourselves. So they're produced within the pituitary gland, and basically, since they act on the opiate receptors in our brain, they reduce pain, they boost feelings of pleasure, and they actually promote overall better well-being, which is pretty cool. So to think that we can do that by going for a walk, or increase our endorphins by doing something like going for a walk, that's pretty cool to think that we can actually get like such a strong response from something that's obviously so easy to control. So the other thing that we will mention a little bit today as well is, research has also discovered a really cool feedback loop between high vagal tone, which is what we can promote by doing things like really deep breathing, which we'll touch on a little bit later as well, and optimizing positive emotions as well, which is obviously going to minimize stress if we're feeling pretty positive about our emotions too. So if we can increase our vagal tone, which again we're going to touch on in a bit more depth a little bit later on, the more mentally healthy and obviously physically healthy as well we're going to be, which is pretty cool. So we obviously know the role exercise can play in controlling emotional and physical symptoms of stress, but it works at quite a deep level as well within our brain and our nervous system. So that's what we're going to touch on a little bit more today as we go. Like Tom mentioned before, we're going to go over, like, I suppose, the adaptive effects that happen within the brain, same way as they do with our muscles. We get that same response at a nervous system level too.
Yeah.
Cool. So I suppose one example that Tom and I just wanted to share with everyone is, I suppose, that the role that recreational kind of exercise can have on, I suppose, taking away from worries and stress that we might have day to day. For Tom and I, one certainly one that we share is golf, getting out on the golf course. Obviously probably the last thing we're thinking about when we're on the golf course is, what we might be thinking about at work or deadlines we might have, and it helps us sort of escape a little bit, which can be a really worthwhile way to manage our stress too. Cool. So the effects of exercise on our stress are endless, and we're going to get now stuck into, I suppose, the slightly more specific exercise which can and how they can affect your stress. So I'll hand back over to Tom.
And we'll talk about specific different kinds of exercise. So we spoke about quite a bit last week the detrimental or corrosive effects of stress. So chronic stress and elevated cortisol and other neurotransmitters can cause neuronal or brain cell dysfunction through something called dendrite shrinkage, which is a part of the brain cell. Here's one picture that I drew earlier of a nerve cell.
Everyone needs to give Tom huge props for his drawing, by the way.
So this is where for every action and thought that we promote, it's these nerve cells that cause all of that. So a message is started here in the nucleus. It runs down the axon down to the dendrites, which is kind of like the branches at the end of each nerve cell. And then neurotransmitters are released onto the next cell. So when we're stressed, those dendrites, I'll show you the picture again. So that's what connects one cell to another, essentially. Those dendrites actually shrink. And then what that causes is poorer connection between neurons, which can further exacerbate the problem of stress, pain, all kinds of different things as well. So it's important to know that exercise, as I'm about to go through, can benefit all those things as well. So we're going to go through and spend a little bit of time going through up next the science of the aerobic exercise and its benefits for the brain. So first of all, what is aerobic exercise? So you might have heard it referred to as cardio exercise, continuous exercise. Essentially, it's exercise that raises your heart rate continuously or for a prolonged period of time, and your body has to continually use oxygen to produce energy to meet the exercise intensity demands. What happens to the body and brain during aerobic exercise? Well, while you're actually exercising, obviously there's more blood flow around to the muscles. Like I mentioned, they need oxygen, they need fuel, so the blood provides this. And obviously it's going to the muscles, but it's also going to the brain as well. So, and to the neurons in the brain cells. And this is happening during exercise. So lots more blood flow going to your brain, which is obviously going to be a positive thing. Once the exercise is finished, it doesn't stop there. So there begins a kind of cellular recovery process, if you like. So reduction in broken bits of DNA within cells, cellular debris gets cleaned up, metabolic byproducts get cleaned up, and this can help to prevent things like cancer growth onset and neurodegeneration, like we just talked about before. So brain cells dying, brain cells shrinking as well. There's a couple of important things called growth factors, which get produced by your brain when you exercise and when you do aerobic exercise in particular. And these have a very key role to play in your brain health and therefore stress as well. So when you're exercising, say you're out for a walk, there's an upregulation in something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Now, big fancy words, but brain-derived from the brain, neurotrophic, so neuro, brain cell, trophic, and then factor. So what it means essentially is it's like fertilizer for brain cells. So this product, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, fertilizer for brain cells, helps grow new brain cells. So that's produced when you're exercising aerobically. Another factor called vascular endothelial growth factor. So essentially that helps promote blood vessel growth and blood flow. So if you've got more neurons and you've got more blood flow to supply those neurons, your brain's going to function a lot better. All of this assists blood flow, promote neurogenesis, prevent damage from chronic stress taking hold as well. So all pretty important things. Cortisol levels, which we know over long periods of time can be not so good for health. They're helped kept in check. There's also increases in neurotransmitters like serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, and these all help neurons fire and wire together. So more of what I was talking on just a second ago. There's a relaxation or resting tension, if you like, of muscle spindles. So breaking a stress feedback loop to the brain, so your body feels less relaxed. Feels more relaxed after aerobic exercise.
Yeah.
We know the positive benefits of exercise on your cardiovascular system and therefore your blood pressure. And as we know from last week, chronic levels of cortisol and stress can raise your blood pressure. There's also another little interesting factor. Exercise can actually help the heart produce something. Another one of these factors, atrial natriuretic peptide, which then helps promote blood flow, promote growth as well, and then actually inhibits the HPA axis, which we know drives chronic stress as well. The harder you work, the more of that atrial natriuretic peptide is produced. So it's directly linked to your exercise intensity. And the last thing, and arguably the most important thing I think about aerobic exercise, is that it gives you a sense of mastery and control over what you're doing. You know, you've got control over your actions, not your stress controlling you, which is a pretty important thing as well. So you're probably thinking, what kind of exercise are we talking about here? Exercise, aerobic exercise, swimming, walking, cycling, running. Do you have a favorite?
Like getting on the bike, and I think probably being in groups is probably the other thing that my favourite is as well. Yep. So whether it's running with a friend or riding with a friend or in team environments, that's probably my preference.
Yeah, very good. So all those are aerobic forms of exercise. If you think about, like, you're going out for a walk for an hour, your heart rate and your blood pressure and your breathing rate's going to be elevated, and it's going to have all those positive effects that we just covered a second ago. Other sports like soccer, tennis, boxing, and activities like dancing also count as aerobic exercise that require a little bit more cognition and decision making as well, which can have more positive benefits for your brain. We know that through research that daily aerobic exercise has the most positive benefits. However, if you can't do something daily, more often is a good thing, absolutely.
Yep.
We know that elevating your heart rate to 70 to 80% of what your predicted maximum might be, it shows really good benefits as well. And we're not saying that you absolutely must have it down to a certain beats per minute, but that's just what the research shows is going to be beneficial as well.
Yep.
If you can, incorporating some higher intensity exercise can see further positive benefits, and this might be something that you consult with one of the EPs here about getting some more higher intensity exercise in for brain health.
Yep.
But when it comes down to it, anything is going to be better than nothing. So even just a 10-minute walk around the block has been shown to have positive effects on the brain, and you'll feel this afterwards. You know after you've been out and you've been moving that you're feeling better. So lots of information there, but bottom line, aerobic exercise, continual movement, fantastic for your brain health and therefore your stress levels as well.
Absolutely. And again, there's probably going to be, I'm about to jump into, I suppose, the role that resistance training can play. So just a slightly different modality of exercise and the role that can have on our stress and I suppose emotion as well.
Yep.
Probably, one thing that we might touch on a bit later on, but I suppose having a bit of a balance between aerobic exercise, stretching, strength exercise is super important here, because there's there'll be a little bit of overlap with some I suppose benefits of resistance training in managing our stress.
Yep.
But obviously there's probably a couple of things that we can get out of aerobic exercise that we won't get so much out of resistance training, and vice versa as well. So that's why, certainly with everyone that comes in here, we obviously have them set up with a nice balance of aerobic exercise and strength training as well. So I suppose into the resistance training side of it. So probably a big thing that we can feel quite acutely is we get to release a lot of muscle tension by doing some resistance training. So
Yep,
it
no
might be doing a squat, might be doing a row over on the pulley machine. I think just that acute sensation of moving some resistance is something that can actually help us, I suppose, really release any sort of stress that we might have had built up over our day or something like that. So I know that we've certainly got a couple of clients that come in later in the day here, or they come into groups later in the day, and they really enjoy doing some strength exercise after a long day of work. They feel like they get a really nice release out of that. But I suppose more specifically at a I suppose physiological level, same as aerobic exercise, we get an increase in blood flow to the brain. So all of our, I suppose, mood enhancing hormones like our endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, like Tom mentioned before, they're certainly getting a good run at it again, which is obviously terrific for us. We certainly get an influx of cortisol as well, which can impact our strength and muscular gains as well. When we get so much, I suppose, buildup of cortisol as a result of stress, it can actually result in muscle atrophy, is a side effect of that. So the reason that happens is because there's a decrease in the protein synthesis that happens at the muscular level as a result of all the cortisol in our system. And this can lead to a decrease in strength, which can then obviously lead to more musculoskeletal complication as well, which can then obviously lead to higher levels of stress, being in pain as well.
Yeah, so essentially to break it down, higher levels of stress and chronic stress and cortisol can actually impact your physical health and how you move around day to day, how difficult you find going up that flight of stairs, or doing that balance task that we give you as well. So it's not just I'm lazy, or I'm feeling terrible today. There's a physiological reason for why your stress might be impacting your physical health as well.
Absolutely. It's not just us saying like, oh, it's good for your mood state or anything like that. When it's broken down and we get into the depths of it, there are physiological responses to exercise which are going to help not only your physical health but your mental health as well. So our cognitive function certainly really benefits from resistance training as well. And the main reason being is that it's been found that resistance training really protects from the degeneration of our hippocampus and actually maximizes the size of our hippocampus, which is part of our brain. So the hippocampus plays a big role in managing our emotions. And so naturally, if there's degeneration of our hippocampus, probably managing our emotions is obviously going to take a little bit of a hit. A
little bit moodier, a little bit prone to outbursts, things like that.
Absolutely. So there's other sort of neuroprotective effects as well, and obviously our self-worth can actually go up with doing new strength exercises as well. So probably a lot of people that might have come in here previously, and we might have shown them a new strength exercise, they actually increase their self-esteem and self-worth out of having completed a new task as well, and being pretty happy with themselves that they've been able to, I suppose, tick off a new exercise. So in terms of, I suppose, what the evidence suggests around, the types of exercise in terms of our strength training, certainly we want to be incorporating big muscle groups and doing compound movements, so multiple joints involved. All right, so not just sticking away like doing a little toe extension. Okay, we want to be doing like our squats, those exercises that are getting lots of muscle groups into gear. So that's I suppose low to moderate resistance training has been found to play a really key role in reducing depression, whereas a slightly more rigorous intensity and up towards moderate and vigorous intensity has been found to reduce anxiety in terms of our resistance training. So certainly important to incorporate all of that in, but probably the one thing I will add with resistance training is and this is slightly obviously away from the stress side of things, but there's definitely a safety element to this as well, and we want to make sure that people that are doing resistance tasks are doing them properly with the correct technique and all of those kinds of things, so they can get obviously the right physical response to it, which is obviously, as we've just mentioned, going to lead to a really cool mental response as well.
And if there's exercises that for example, you can't move in a particular way that allows you to do heavy compound lifting exercises, then that's where we love helping people to be able to move towards that or move better to get to these points. So
absolutely,
it's not just about let's find the heaviest thing that we can and let's lift it. It's a bit of a process to get there sometimes, but if you can get to that point, fantastic, because your brain and your body are going to see lots and lots of benefits for that as well,
which is huge.
Cool. So the last kind of exercise that we're going to talk about is just around whether you want to call it mobility training, flexibility, stretching, however you want to think about it. We all know what sort of stretching is, and the goal of these is often to relieve or reduce muscle tension. Same thing that happens with aerobic exercise. You get that reduction in muscle tension and stress.
Yeah, like we spoke about last week, that a response to stress is feeling like your muscles do
Yeah.
get super tense. They guard against your response. So, so mobility to try and relieve some of that tension is super important.
Absolutely. So when we're stretching, our central nervous system is in control. We're often controlling our breathing a lot better as well. We've got enhanced blood flow to our brain just because we're moving. And some of the endorphins that we spoke about earlier interact with the receptors in your brain that reduce your perceptions of pain and reduce stress as well. So that can be a really, really good thing. Ability to let go of where you're carrying stress. So, people, this is just a generalization, but people feel like, oh, I'm stressed. They carry a lot of stress in their neck or their shoulders or something like that. So doing some upper body stretching can help reduce the stress, the actual physical stress and tension within those sites, as well as have the other benefits on the brain, like we spoke about before. There's impacts on the vagus nerve, which is something that Jack touched on before, but the vagus nerve essentially connects our brain to all of our vital organs, and it's controlled autonomically, so without our processing. So obviously you're not thinking about how your heart's beating or anything like that. And as mentioned earlier, there's a really positive association between increased vagal tone and positive emotions as well. And if your vagal nerve is more active, that can be definitely a good thing in controlling emotions and therefore stress as well.
I think probably stay tuned for probably more information about that on Friday as well. As one way we can really increase our vagal tone is by doing really deep breathing techniques, which or meditation and those kinds of, I suppose, techniques, and we're going to be going into them in a lot more depth on Friday. So stay tuned for more discussion around that then too.
And the last benefit of sort of mobility and stretching, depending on when you do it, but it can sometimes have a benefit on sleep as well. And we've touched on this in previous videos too. But we know that reduced tension in the body and controlled breathing can definitely help reduce some of the mental stimulation associated with stress and anxiety when you're trying to fall asleep as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. So plenty of 3 kinds of exercise: aerobic exercise, resistance training, and then stretching as well. And all 3 have different responses for the body, but all 3 have really, really positive impact on your stress levels and your brain health as well.
Absolutely. So probably in something I've been asked a little bit, I suppose, is like the role that other, I suppose, different practices, whether it's something like Tai Chi or yoga and those kinds of things, and the role that they can have in monitoring our mental health and our stress levels, is obviously they get quite a bit of airtime in terms of being published as being really beneficial for your health, and certainly they are. But when you break them down, you can break them back down into the stretching and a couple of the other relaxation techniques, which we're going to touch on Friday. So if you've got any sort of questions, I suppose, directly around Tai Chi or yoga or those kinds of practices, please do sing out. But certainly, like I said, if we break those down into what those practices actually are, which is often relaxation by deep breathing, stretching, mobility, we can then, I suppose, look back at the concepts we've just gone over to and the impacts that they have on our health.
Why they have
Cool. So I suppose one thing that we're probably have all been guilty of at some stage is that when we are stressed, we tend to find every reason under the sun as to why we won't do our exercise. So barriers and things that I suppose might be stopping us from being active tend to, I suppose, rear their head a lot more when we are stressed. We're wanting to probably tick off a lot of other things that we might deem as more important at the time, and that comes back to, I suppose, wanting to cope, which we obviously addressed quite extensively last week. So hopefully today we're just going to, I suppose, touch briefly on what a lot of barriers are as well for our exercise, and they're not just for, I suppose, you guys watching. They're certainly barriers that Tom and I will find with our exercise as well. They're there for all of us, but hopefully, like I said, there's a couple of little, I suppose, things that you might get out of it in terms of how to overcome those barriers. So the first one's time.
So I mean, always we hear it a lot, and I use it myself occasionally as well. I just didn't have time to exercise today, and that very well may be true if you've got a busy day at work, things like that. But when it comes down to it, if something is a priority for you, you make time for it. And that's not saying that anyone's been lazy in any way or looking for excuses, because sometimes it is a genuine factor. But if something's a really big priority for you, you'll find a way to get up 10 minutes earlier to go for a walk, or incorporate a bit of walking into your shopping or something like that. So especially at the moment, with isolation, time becomes less of an excuse when a lot of the time people are just at home all day. So lack of time.
Obviously I think a lot of us find it difficult to exercise by ourselves as well. So there's I suppose a social element,
and probably a motivation factor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some accountability, I guess, that's associated with going for a walk with someone, or going for a bike ride with someone, or meeting your friend at the dog park to go for a walk and let the pooches run around for a bit. So certainly, I suppose trying to get your family and your friends on board with your activity as well is something that's really key. So organising a time throughout the week to go for a walk with a friend, or it might be a sibling or your parents or whatever the case is, or your grandchildren. Obviously there's lots of really good supports out there for everyone that can help them be really active, so it's really important to use those people too.
I guess a good personal example for me is don't really enjoy running all that much, but I've got a friend who's kind of in the same boat, and together we're on top of it enough to be able to say, hey, have you got an hour for a run this week? When can we get it done? And together, if you say, okay, mate, I'll meet you at the park, or I'll meet outside your place at 8 o'clock in 2 days' time. That's a commitment that you've made, and definitely increases your motivation level to exercise as well when it might be maybe a bit of a struggle for you. Lack of energy is another barrier to exercise as well, and something that is important to know is that oftentimes it might feel like it's the last thing that you want to do when you're stressed. You've had a really busy day of work. The last that you're tired. The last thing you want to do is exercise. But there's actually an association between physical activity and increasing your energy levels and managing fatigue in all kinds of different populations. And
absolutely,
I think it's important to know that, and people say this every time that they come in here as well. Even if you're feeling stressed and tired before exercise, you're almost always going to feel better and a bit more upbeat and afterwards.
Countless times, I'm sure, not just Tom and myself, but Dylan and the other guys here as well would have experienced someone coming in, whether it's for a one-on-one or a group based session here, and they get to the end of their session and legitimately say the words to us, I feel so much better than I did at the start, just from being active for half an hour, 45 minutes. So certainly, whilst it can be a bit of a hindrance at the time, feeling pretty fatigued and just the last thing you feel like doing is getting up and going for a walk, the benefit that you actually can get out of that is huge. And I suppose one thing that Tom and I have been, doing quite a bit of now is getting people to, initially look back at how they map out their day. So go over their days retrospectively and look at, okay, I woke up, I had breakfast, I got ready for work, drove to work. And then they actually log, how they're feeling during these times as well. This is really good because then you can actually look back on how your weeks play out, and you can, look at times when you might have a bit more energy to be really active then as well. So there's lots of different strategies in terms of how to manage the barrier of being, fatigued or lacking energy. And it can obviously help with things like motivation as well. If it's planned ahead and, it's written down, you've got that almost, whether it's an accountability to someone else, or for me, I know accountability to myself too. I hate having it written down and looking back on it at the end of the week and going, oh, I didn't go for that.
I
didn't go for that ride. It's something that I don't particularly like doing. So planning ahead and using something like an activity planner or mapping your week out in terms of when you're going to get your activity in is something that can be really beneficial as well.
Yep, absolutely. Lack of motivation, we've kind of touched on a number of times, but, couldn't be bothered, lazy, those kind of things. It's pretty normal, especially if you don't love or enjoy exercise. Social support will help. Planning ahead will help. Setting yourself goals will help. Joining an exercise group or class will help. There's lots of different ways that you can overcome that lack of motivation. And oftentimes, once you start, you'll feel like that's all you needed. So often, for me, as soon as you put those running shoes on or you literally step outside, it's like, okay, I'm fully motivated now. Sometimes it's just about taking that first step
Absolutely.
to get in the car to go to the gym or
getting
get out the door and things like that as well.
Getting out the door is often the hardest bit. So
Yep.
I suppose a lot of reasons that other people, I suppose, they see it as a barrier is they're scared of hurting themselves. And they then look at, I suppose, and this comes with stress. They then, I suppose, dramatize what that could potentially lead to as well. If I do exercise and hurt myself, then I won't be able to work and I won't be able to, drive and whatever the case is. So I suppose if you are, I suppose, really conscious of being active in a way that might be sore, certainly consulting one of us is where I would have thought your absolute first stop in terms of making sure that you're doing the right exercise in terms of the different modes of exercise and specifically the right different, I suppose, strength activities, mobility activities and those kinds of things, and to make sure that what you're doing, you're not only going to benefit greatly from, you're going to be able to do it without the fear of hurting yourself, that kind of thing, which is obviously really important as well, because we certainly don't need to be going into exercise feeling like, oh, we're at risk of injury and that kind of thing.
Lack of skill can potentially be another barrier to exercise, whether that's never been very good at sport, don't feel like you can move particularly well. These are all things that can be learned and acquired, and whether it's an exercise physiologist that helps you out or taking a new class, a dance class or something like that. Again, just overcoming that first step can be pretty important, and you probably find that you actually really enjoy those things once you learn the new skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I suppose, the last one that we'll tick off, and it's certainly one that's getting thrown up quite a little bit at this time of year, and that's the weather. So naturally, Melbourne, June, July, August, the weather can be a little bit dire, can be gloomy and rainy and wet and all of those kinds of things, which a lot of people just go, well, it was too wet, I couldn't go for a walk. And, there's so many ways we can be active without actually having to potentially leave the door as well. Don't get me wrong, going for a walk on a nice sunny day, in a park somewhere is obviously utopia, but there's certainly, on days where it might be a little bit gloomy, there's, home exercise programs, which we obviously help everyone develop that comes in here. And that's obviously going to be your first stop in terms of making sure that you can still get your quota of activity and exercise in to help manage your stress, even if the weather is a bit gloomy as well.
Yeah, and I guess as well, if something is really big and it's a priority for you, whether it's exercise or any other kind of lifestyle change, if exercise is a real priority, then just the fact that it's cold outside isn't going to stop you going for a walk. So definitely barriers that can all be overcome. And things like support is crucial. So whether that's from us here, if you come and use the gym here, family, friends, dog, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's all important, and all goes towards, I guess stress can sometimes be a bit of a barrier as well, and impact on all those barriers that we've just spoken about. And
for sure,
that's how sometimes it can be hard to start. But once you do get the ball rolling and becomes a little bit of a habit, it goes a long, long way to managing your stress. Exercise does. So, I think
absolutely. That's all the content we have for this afternoon. So hopefully, whether you've watched live or you rewatch the video on delay later on, there's something that you can take out of that in terms of, I suppose, getting a better understanding of how exercise works at a physiological level, in terms of not only, we obviously know the benefits it has for our cardiovascular health and strength, but of what it does for our brain and our emotions and our mood state as well, because it's there's certainly a lot of evidence out there to support the benefits of the different types of exercise to manage our stress, and so hopefully getting a better understanding of that is something that you found extremely beneficial.
We've got plenty more coming up for later in the week, so we're back to a normal Friday live time slot,
1 p.m.
1 p.m. this week. Good, got that right.
Yep.
And we're going to cover a whole bunch of different other lifestyle factors other than exercise that can have a big impact on your stress, because bottom line is you're probably only going to be exercising for a little portion of the day, but what you're doing throughout the rest of the day can definitely impact your stress as well. If you've got any questions about stress, types of exercise, what we're going to be talking about on Friday, please leave a comment, send us an email, or if you're coming into the clinic, get in touch, because we want to try and deliver this content for everyone that's watching. And if you have something that's on your mind or feel like we can help you in any way, that's the reason we do these videos. So please let us know and reach out and get in touch. I think the more people that do that, it'll sort of snowball, and we'll get more and more involvement from everyone in the Health Hub community. So
absolutely,
yeah, I think that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back in a couple of days for more talk on stress.
Bye. Bye guys. We'll see you 1 p.m. on Friday.
Yep. Have a good afternoon. Bye.